Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for Disruption. Today, we're going to focus on the short term, kind of that 3 to 6 month mark, what were to happen if you kind of had that lapse in funding or something happened. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that today. And we're going to be using the same structure as last time, kind of running this as discussions, and we'll have some small breakout rooms and things as well. So kind of our overview and purpose, we're going to be, like I said, looking at kind of what just happened in January and kind of use that as our background. We're going to look at the necessary elements to kind of have an emergency plan, having your checklist ready if something like this were to happen. So we're going to be looking at this from the short-term funding loss kind of disruption perspective. This is going to kind of plan on focusing on two main components, which are what can you do now? So to prepare for anything like this to happen again. So like I said, maybe making a checklist. We'll go through some different things today. And then what can you do in the moment? So when this does happen, what do we need to be doing? How do we make sure we have our ducks in a row and what we're doing is executed correctly and in a good way to kind of get this hopefully resolved, right? So let's talk first about how to prepare. So in a short-term kind of contingency planning focus, we're going to look at kind of 1 to 3 months. I feel like at max that would be kind of maybe like 4, 5, 6 months, but we're going to really focus today more on that short-term aspect. And what this plan kind of includes and what you should be working on at your organization should be starting with the who. So creating a communication plan for media, elected officials, and other key contacts, coalition members, board members, whoever that may be, kind of having that communication tree created beforehand is where we would like to start first. So we know who we need to communicate with. Then we move on to the what. So identifying what you need to do to prepare. So what needs to be prepared? What needs to be sustained? And what kind of steps should we take should something like this happen? And kind of having that, hey, here's our 1, 2, 3, what we need to do because this happened. Then we have the when. So deciding what you should do now versus when the actual disruption or the loss of funding occurs. So we need to kind of take a look and see what can we do now? Can we continue to talk with our legislators? Can we talk to our local officials and anyone else that we can kind of continue to keep them informed on what we're doing now? So that way when we have this loss of funding or this disruption, when we go to them and ask them for help or assistance in kind of getting this ratified, it's not the first time we've talked to them, we have that rapport. We have them, in our back pocket, so to speak. And then we move on to the where. So conducting an inventory of our current resources. I don't think we do this enough. I think it's really important and definitely something that as an organization, we should continue to keep an updated kind of inventory of our resources and where they're coming from, how much they are, whether that be, in kind from space, from a fiscal agent or someone's time, whether that's volunteer time or in-kind time, different things like that. It's really important to keep an eye on where our resources are actually coming from. So in the event of a disruption, we can kind of see, well, what can be sustained because, we get this, and this, at an in-kind rate. These kind of people volunteer. Can anyone step up? Different things like that. So we can know exactly what we need to ask for to sustain us maybe in that short-term period until this disruption gets resolved. And then lastly, the why. So promoting your successes on a regular basis and not just in a time of need. So this is, again, making sure we're kind of communicating with the people now and continuing to share our successes, share what we're doing, our different services and things that we're offering the community to show our value now, not just when it matters because, hey, we lost funding and a disruption here happened, we need help. So making sure that they already know before we come to them with the ask for support, hey, we know you guys are valuable. We see it on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis. We see what you're doing. So making sure we kind of have that ahead of time and we're making sure that we have that on a regular basis. And then lastly, just don't forget this can be a stressful time, whether it's for someone who's might have to be laid off versus someone who has to do the laying off versus, the fiscal agent who suddenly can't support you. Whatever this may be or whoever is involved, it can be stressful. So I think it's sometimes really important to just take that breath and remind ourselves that having a plan in place, whether that be one or two steps, or a whole list of 20 steps that we do in cases of like this, where there's that funding disruption, having that plan in place will help you feel more calm and effectively and efficiently, hopefully get that resolved in time of crisis like this. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move into our first kind of breakout room where we're going to start a discussion, and I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to talk us through that.
What things do you need to have, internally at your organization so that you'll be in a better place to address this possibility? And then if one person in your group can be prepared to share in the larger group what you chatted about, that would be great. All right. So how many groups did we end up with? 3?
We did 4.
4. Okay. So who would like to report out first? Deacon mentioned that Amy is, Emily.
Yeah, I'm ready and raring to go here.
Let's go, Emily.
Nice to see you. So we talked a lot about having effective communication, starting from often acknowledging the anxiety around this issue and not acknowledging the sadness when people are laid off and or programs have to stop happening. We also talked a little bit about what kind of policies do we need around these conversations, deciding on the level of involvement and transparency that employees and or partners that we might want to share with them. And then somebody even mentioned that like within the policy or the promise after layoff is that we will write you a glowing letter of recommendation, right? I mean, unless it's not true, but yeah. Right. That we want to support whatever you're doing next.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Amy.
Certainly, yes. We talked about having as many as we learned and talked about in the last webinar, having those media and legislative contact lists ready to go. We don't have to do the thinking in the moment. They're just ready and we can begin reaching out to necessary people. We talked about having those sustainability plans up to date so you can refer to those in the event that there is a funding disruption. We talked about having communication plans out to our partners and what that looks like, as well as kind of staffing contingency plans might be important to have in place. And then a list of kind of who are those partners or community folks that we could go to for potential short-term funding, emergency funding, that kind of 1 to 3 month gap fillers, having a list of those ready and able to be used.
All right, thanks. Jules, do you want to go now?
Yep, that's fine. So we talked about finding grants that aren't federal and having a backup just in case. Keeping our history documented so that way if there's any changes for all of our efforts and successes, having data documented and having it in multiple different places. We've talked about having a backup funding stream and kind of calming that frenzy that they're seeing. Filling gaps of who's missing and like massaging and rubbing shoulders or massaging the relationships and rubbing shoulders with people who potentially have some deep pockets or vested interest. show the value of your organization to your key stakeholders. Make sure that you have that kind of elevator speech of the things that you've done that are really great, and why it needs to be kept going, and putting your best foot forward and ensuring websites and front facing efforts are not going to cause anybody to put you under a microscope or kind of hiding efforts that might be scrutinized by key stakeholders or funders in the federal level, and working on your sustainability plan or planning to work on your sustainability plan.
All right, and then our last group, I'm not sure who's reporting out.
I'm reporting out. So we, like others, discussed diverse funding streams and knowing when they end, a solid sustainability plan, a good relationship with your funders, know who is taking advantage of your program and what value it is to them. This is also a chance to evaluate the programs and see what's effective. Educating staff on the importance of funding and succession planning, education of the board members, like if you're a nonprofit, making sure they know what you're doing, and that they're all up to date, everybody's on the same page, who speaks on behalf of the organization, and just know your supports.
All right, thank you. Seems like there's some commonalities there between groups, and people have been taking action since, January to be proactive about addressing things. All right, Jess.
Oh, Kelly, I forgot the one last part that was mentioned was to have the PRCs support with a directory of grant listings to offer potentially funding the membership for those listings. And hi, Jess's little friend.
So sort of thinking about those structures and before anything else, some questions to ask yourselves and ask your organization. And this sort of came up because there were folks who, did not know what was happening in January because they weren't on the right email list. So something to really consider are multiple staff members receiving grant communications from funders. Is it all going to Jerry and Jerry's on vacation for a month? Because when Jerry goes on vacation, he does not check his email. Or multiple people getting that. Do you have the contact information for all of your project officers, all of your funders? It's written down somewhere. It's easy to access. You know exactly who to contact. Do multiple staff members have access to reporting systems, both programmatic and financial? Are all staff aware of reporting due dates? And then do you regularly check your grant portals for new information? Because, sometimes there might be a glitch and an email doesn't come your way, but are you regularly checking, be it, weekly or twice a month, whatever it is, to see if there's new information available? Because there are glitches and sometimes people get things and sometimes people don't. I know we've all experienced that. But things to ask that, before you really even get into some of these other planning steps, to make sure this checklist is done and we have all of these things in place.
So it sounds like communication was a theme in a lot of the conversations that you all had, having a plan, who needs to know what. So we're gonna dive into that a little bit more, and thinking about like who needs to know what in these situations, for us to avoid that confusion, keep the necessary work and procedures going as much as possible, and hopefully galvanize a coalition and a community response to the disruption. So we're going to go back into our small groups and just focus in a little more on that communication piece and think about who should you contact in that first critical 24 hours, and what is important to communicate to them, or what information is important to get from them, and share with you. So I think Jess will put us back into our groups. Okay, let's see, anyone want to go first sharing? Sorry, I cut someone off.
I'll try it again. How about Jerry?
Oh, Jerry, yes.
All right. So our group two, um, and the topic had to do with who to contact and what to ask or what to talk about. I get we talked about, well, depending on where the funding came from, is it federal, state, or local, that may tip us off in terms of who we need to, do I know that person well enough? And do I know my elected officials well enough? It kind of keeps them in a loop there. Um, we also may need to know maybe some personal emails, because if we get this contact, this scare on a Friday afternoon, who can I have to wait till Monday, or can I talk to somebody over the weekend? So that's really good relationship building there, personal contacts. We also felt internally we need to make sure our fiscal agent knows what's going on, not to panic. Maybe just who needs to know right now. At some point in time, maybe everybody needs to know, but who needs to know as we begin to kind of figure out, okay, what to do next, kind of map out our strategy, kind of go slow and go small as for starters. Um, and then also being aware of the impact on staff and or our community, our members, clients, participants, whatever top, however we title people. So that's about it.
Thanks, Jerry. All right, let's see.
I can go next for group 3, Marianne.
Okay, thanks, Charlotte.
We talked about some of the same things Jerry just said, but talking to our board, letting them know the status of things. Definitely our legislative partners. Someone said, know who your voice of power is that can escalate things up the chain. Partners, people that you may have contracts with that affect the work that they're doing. Definitely, if you have a pass-through agency, your fiscal department, looking to see if there's emergency funds. And then lastly, we also talked about the immediate staff that this affects.
Let's see. Emily, I think, are you a reporter?
Yeah, I am. At the last minute. So, my group talked a lot of acronyms. So I'm not going to be able to say all of them, but if anybody wants to come off mute and do that, we said a lot of the other things. I think the one thing that I'm keeping in my head that hasn't been said yet is other grantees of the same type of funding. Just banding together and seeing what they know and or just sharing the load of worry. Does anybody want to come off and say some of those like national places that you were going to tap into? Janet, you're coming to mind just thinking about, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to repeat the acronyms properly. Thank you.
Yeah. We contacted our Mental Health America national office in Washington, and then National Council for Mental Wellbeing in Washington, and because we figured they knew better than we knew what was going on, and so that was one of our first emails, like, what do you know, and what can you tell us, and what do we do next? So that was very helpful for us.
So just as, a lot of you, I think we hit on most all of these, as well as some extra, but thinking about, some that should be pretty universally contacted in that first critical 24 hours. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit more. I'm going to turn it over to Laura. But talking about, our funder, and I'm not sure how many people brought that up, but actually reaching out to the funder itself. And I know sometimes that's successful and we get information and sometimes we don't, but having that inquiry on record, fiscal agents, our boards and our leadership, our media and elected officials. So I'm going to turn that over to Laura to talk a little bit more about those.
All right. Just can you go back to the last slide just for a second? I want to show that website. So when it comes to elected officials, don't forget that there's a really good tool here. I mean, you can, there's the link. I know we'll be sharing the slides, but if you just Google or type in commoncause.org, you can put in your information or your organization's information to find out who your elected officials are, just to make that an easier process for when you need to find that information on the fly. And then, of course, with representatives, they're changing every 2 years anyway, so you're able to get up-to-date information. All right, now we can move forward. So the funder. I think as we know, especially now and the times that we're in, we're probably not going to get a whole lot of information. They might not even know what's going on. I think that's sort of the word that we got from what happened last month was that, they were finding out information as we were finding out information. But we can always ask the question because I think there's also critical mass in lots of people asking the same questions, and hopefully we'll get some answers. So, some things that you can ask: why was the funding cut, frozen, or otherwise disrupted? That can also help us if there is a way to get that funding back. Are there steps or things that we can do to make that happen? What the timelines are for closing out grants and grant reporting. And then also, will there be any funding and how much will be available during the closeout period? So if you remember from last time, there was an email that went out and said you have something like 120 days to do your final reports and close out everything. Ask the question, is there going to be funding available to be able to do that? Because of course that takes staff time and resources. And next slide. Of course, your fiscal agent. And it's important to think about things that you can do right now after this webinar next week. Kind of put some plans in place, that things you can do now, and then things that you need to do or should happen if there does come a notification that funding has been cut or otherwise disrupted. So with the fiscal agent, some conversations that you can have now. Ask them if they're willing, if this happens again, would they be willing to continue to provide funding? And if so, how much and how long? Are they able to move around funds to make sure that staff are able to stay on, for an indefinite period of time? And then also, are they willing to continue to provide those in-kind resources? I know that we have a lot of clients where even if the fiscal agent is not providing any additional funding, they are providing things like office space, technology, storage space, and other types of support. So see if those things would also continue in the event of a funding disruption. And it's really important, if you can, to get this commitment in writing, just in case there comes a time where you need to put this commitment into place. And then, of course, if that funding loss or disruption has occurred, most important thing is to tell them what you know. It may not be a lot, but you can pass on the communication or the information that you have, and then, of course, activate that agreement about what they are willing and able to provide. Next slide. Also, board and coalition leadership. You can plan ahead now by discussing what do we do if this happens. I know a lot of us were kind of scrambling last month to get groups together and deciding basically what happens, especially in the event we don't have any paid staff. So really laying out that plan, that contingency plan. What happens if we have a sudden loss in funding? Are there resources we can move to keep the doors open? So really having an idea of our budget, the revenue that comes in, restricted versus unrestricted dollars. Are there things we can move around to at least keep operations going? The really big question, who takes responsibility in the event paid staff is gone? Some of our organizations, we may only have 1 or 2 paid staff and they're dependent on grant funding. So really deciding if something does happen, something happens abruptly, and this may not be in funding loss either, this may be in other times of transition, just knowing who is responsible to keep things moving forward. What information, have the board leader or the board members, the coalition leadership tell you what information do they need to be prepared and making sure that they have it. And then also, of course, the big one, what are their networks? Who do they know to contact to advocate for funding restoration? Really understanding that now, understanding where the gaps might be and how you can build other relationships. And of course, kind of the same, once that funding loss has occurred, you go to them, you tell them what you know. That's when it's always good to have those talking points on hand. You can have things prepared before an event like this happens and then tweak them as needed based on the circumstances. And then that's when you really ask them, okay, you mentioned these people and that you have influence with them. Go ahead and communicate with your contacts. It's time to go. Next slide. And then media. there are things that you can do again to plan now, and things that you should already be doing when it comes to keeping in contact with your local media. And then, of course, when something happens, um, it's important now to go ahead and start like that media contact list. So really going through, maybe working with your media sector representative, um, really identifying, okay, who is your local media, who is in your market, and then how do you contact them if you have a story or something that you want to share, and maybe keeping a spreadsheet of that and updating as necessary, just so it's ready to go. And then, of course, having talking points about the role of the organization. So your successes, what an impact on the loss of funding, what that would look like. Would jobs be lost? How many jobs would be lost? Would services be cut? How many services would be cut? How many people would be affected? It's important to be specific and give numbers as much as possible. But we also need that story too. That's what really, it goes hand in hand, having that raw data, those numbers, but then also having that personal touch too. You can also identify others that may be impacted by loss or disruption. I know in the past circumstance, a lot of our groups got together and sort of, if they were together in a local area, and did like an interview or something together. And then, like I said, pulling together that contact list. So who to contact, what their information is, and also who will contact them. That's where you especially kind of tap into your networks, your coalition members, if they have relationships with some of the people on that list. And then, of course, if that loss or disruption has occurred, you revise those talking points, make sure they're up to date, send a press release or other communication about what's going on. And then also make yourself or contact people available for interviews. And that's something you can decide ahead of time too, just who's comfortable with that. Maybe you as a paid staff person, you're not able or you're not comfortable with that, but your board chair is the face and has no problem doing those kinds of things. That's when you can decide then who is the appropriate person. And then once we activate this plan, making sure they're available. Next slide. And contacting the elected officials really looks the same as contacting our media. Of course, we want to have all of those things available, being able to identify others to really tell that picture or show that story of how many organizations are affected, and then also having, looking at that common cause and other resources to make sure we have an up-to-date list. Send communication, follow up via phone or email. A lot of the, the elected officials, they have multiple ways to contact them. Oftentimes it's a form you can submit, but also email addresses and phone numbers for their staff or their office. And then again, make yourself or someone else available to provide additional information if they reach out or call you back. Next slide. What I think is most important, also something that you can do now, is not to wait to tell your organization's story. It's important that we communicate with our local media, our elected officials, other key stakeholders, local funders on a regular basis, when times are good too, and we want to brag about the things that we're doing in community. That allows us to develop relationships and remind them of our value when we have to go back if something unfortunate has happened. You kind of want to position yourself as the expert in your community in the things that you do. When I worked at a local health department and I did public information, you want to get to the point where you're that person that they are contacting when they're doing a story on whatever it is that your organization does. So obviously with the health department, it was things like the flu and, of course, during COVID, it was COVID, and being that to be able to do a story, tell what's happening, tell what people can do to protect themselves. That's how you cultivate a relationship. So you know that if something happens and you need to get the word out, they're going to pick up the phone. They're going to be more willing to engage with you and do that story. So don't wait, start now, let people know the good stuff that you're doing now so you have that relationship for the future. And I think it's back to Deacon for the next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura. So what resources do we have? As part of any good sustainability planning, we should be doing this kind of all along, right? So thinking about what resource you have and what's available, where it comes from, how you can use it, what your commitments are from a money standpoint is so very important. We talked briefly about being able to identify who in your community has might be able to help you out on a very short-term basis, whether it be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, in the event of disruption or loss of funding to kind of get you over that initial hump. That's part of understanding what resources do you have, what resources do you need, and then structurally, really think about who in your coalition, who in your leadership, uh, are they going to stay committed? What are their roles? Are they willing to take over a leadership role if you lose funding? Who's in their sphere of influence? Right? There's a whole exercise when we do this kind of broad-based contingency planning to sustainability planning. Sustainability planning, we talk about spheres of influence. We do this map of kind of like 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon, right? Like who knows who and how close is that relationship and what does that relationship mean? That's part of understanding your resources because it's not just money, but it's also the people you know and the people that you know who know people, right? We're coalitions and we have advisory boards, we have boards of directors for a reason, more than just them coming to a meeting and giving us their advice. This is when that rubber meets the road. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Who could provide you? Identify that group, that governmental agency, that foundation that says that you can approach now and say, in the event, would you be able to consider providing us short-term funding if this were to happen again? This is all that pre-work that's so very important. Next slide. So this is on our website, right, Jess?
Yes, it is.
Right, so this is on our website, and it's also when you get the PowerPoint, this takes you to the link. This is just a very simple sample resource inventory that you can use with your group to kind of walk through what do we have, where they come from, and what can we use it for, just as a way to start organizing that in your head. So again, draw your attention to it. It's on our website or underneath our in our documents portal, and the link will also be shared with you when you receive the PowerPoint. Next slide. So, last question. This is just a more chat thing. So, as you're thinking through this, what support do you need from ECS as you're thinking through developing this contingency plan, thinking about where do I go next? What is the next step? Who do I ask? Please put that in chat as we're wrapping up our conversation today, and then we'll take a look at those and start organizing resources and organizing our support for you. Next. Our commitment to you. We can provide, obviously, additional information on this topic. I think those of you in the room know that we have a wealth of information, a wealth of ideas from our experience that we've had doing this for so long. And so we're happy to provide you our expertise, our perspective on things. We can assist you in the development of any one of the components discussed, whether it be resource inventory, sphere of influence, thinking through who in my community potentially could have that contingency funding. And if you really want to go whole hog, we can help facilitate the comprehensive long and short-term sustainability planning process, kind of womb to tomb. Everybody's in a different place, but we want to say, we're committed to helping you where we can and how we can. And these are just some examples. Well, I want to thank everybody for your attention and participation today. We really, really appreciate you, and we appreciate the work that you do. And please let us know how we can help you moving forward. And we will be having another one probably I'm not sure how long, probably a couple, 3 weeks. We'll be having the third session of this webinar series.